Hey everyone, my name is Wedge. Guess what? Tons of Battle for Zendikar's story has happened since we last had the chance to catch up on it. So that's what we're doing today. Yup, we're bringing you up to speed on everything that's gone on in the Zendikar universe. Oh man, time to strap in, boys and girls. This is going to be a bumpy ride. You should probably hit that like button, for safety. Also, if you like lore videos, but yeah, safety. We got some lead in to the Battle for Zendikar storyline shortly after Magic Origins came out. Gideon got some focus in a story called Limits. That's limits as in Gideon is reaching his. Because at the time he was pulling double duty. Fighting Eldrazi on Zendikar by day and hunting criminals on Ravnica by night tends to take a lot out of a guy. Gideon finally realizes there's someone he can ask for help, who he knows is a fellow planeswalker, the living guildback himself, Jace Beleren. We next joined Gideon during the story Catching Up. Jace was having a fancy, if quite uneasy dinner with Liliana Vess when Gideon suddenly interrupts to explain the situation on Zendikar. Gideon explained that in his momentary absence on Ravnica, the Eldrazi overran Seagate, the Zendikari people's last and best refuge. Despite Liliana's protest, Jace is swayed to join Gideon and help them uncover the secrets of the Hedrons. Jace explains that he was partly responsible for the release of the Eldrazi, if unwittingly so. He even tries to convince Liliana to join them, though naturally she declines. Next stop is Ragatha in Offers to the Fire. Chandra has just been made the new abbot of Carrow Keep when Jace and Gideon arrive, hoping to convince Chandra to join them on Zendikar. And while Chandra is rather torn up over the matter, she ultimately refuses. After all, she is needed at Carrow Keep. She became abbot as a successor to Saranoch, the previous abbot who has just passed away. However, based on what we've seen of coming sets, I suspect this won't be the last we've seen of Chandra. In For Zendikar, we catch up with Nissa still on Zendikar. She's fighting alongside Ashaya, her name for the elemental formed from the very soul of Zendikar. Suddenly, Nissa is approached by a vampire who claims to have known Anowin. He gives Nissa a small packet of seeds and explains. This vampire knows Nissa is a planeswalker and wants her to take the seeds to another plane and plant them so that some part of Zendikar can survive. Nissa takes the seeds but has another purpose in mind. They will be the beginnings of a new start for Zendikar itself once the Eldrazi are defeated. Slaughter at the Refuge picks up once again with Gideon and Jace having just arrived back on Zendikar. Immediately, they are visually assaulted by the carnage left behind where Seagate once stood. Just after that, they're physically assaulted by some straggling Eldrazi. While Jace admits that physical combat isn't exactly his strong suit, they manage to dispatch the monsters. Then it's off to find survivors. Gideon wants to bring Jace to Jori N, a merfolk scholar who had been studying at Seagate, who he expects will know about their research on the Hedron network. The two planeswalkers reach a battlement and there are survivors waiting beyond the wall. However, before they can go inside, more Eldrazi appear. Gideon sends Jace inside while he fights off the monsters. He and Jace reconvene afterwards. According to other survivors, Jace says Jori N is not among them. Some believe she never even escaped Seagate and her death is not only possible but probable. All is not lost, however. Gideon meets up with Commander General Vorik leading the survivors. Gideon points them in the direction of a nearby Hedron still floating. While the climb may be perilous, the Hedron would provide a vantage point safe from most Eldrazi and with a great strategic view of the surroundings. The survivors make camp atop the Hedron and Gideon sets out in search of Jori N. Next, we rejoin Nissa in the Silent Cry. Nissa and Ashaya are still fighting off Eldrazi and find a moment of solace. And, well, the story isn't over yet, so you can probably imagine how well that went. Seemingly out of nowhere, Nissa's connection to the land just breaks. Her connection to Ashaya is gone, and she can no longer seem to contact the soul of the world as she could before. Nissa stumbles out into the desolate landscape in search of Ashaya and finds little, but she does encounter a merfolk fighting off yet more Eldrazi. Nissa and the merfolk go on the move while fighting off Eldrazi. Nissa sees firsthand the abandoned ruin where Seagate once stood. Without Ashaya, Nissa is forced to fight directly with her sword. As Nissa and the merfolk keep fighting, nearby core survivors cast down hooks to them. They take the ropes and are pulled up to where the core were waiting. Leading them was a human, clearly not a local, Gideon. Nissa immediately recognizes him as a planeswalker. Meanwhile, Gideon immediately recognizes Nissa's merfolk partner as Jori N. She survived Seagate and fought her way out. Nissa introduces herself to Gideon as a fellow planeswalker and explains to him about the severance she felt with the world. However, Gideon had felt no such thing. His own magic remained as potent as ever, even as Nissa was separated from her power in a moment. Next up is the Believer's Pilgrimage. Jorian, having finally found safety after leaving Seagate, approaches Jace just outside the encampment. They talk, Jace wanting to find out what Jory knows about the Hedrons. Unfortunately, Jory doesn't know much, more of what the researchers accomplished than how they accomplished it. Jory permits Jace to examine her memories directly, and he also discovers in this process that Jory personally witnessed the death of the head researcher. Given what they know and what they don't know, Jace swiftly determines that if they intend to make any progress, they'll need to travel to the Eye of Ugin in distant Akum. It takes some convincing since Jace refuses to use mind magic to do so directly, but Gideon agrees to allow Jace and Jory to take provisions and set out for the Eye. He doesn't join them as he believes the voyage may be suicidal just for Jace, let alone for a whole camp of survivors. After several days of traveling, Jory and Jace encounter an Eldrazi. A core woman swoops in as though out of nowhere. She kills the travelers' Herda and urges them to follow her while the Eldrazi is distracted eating the felled beast of burden. Jace and Jory follow the core, who introduces herself as Eiley and leads them to her own camp, a camp where Ulamog himself awaits at the opposite end. Eiley and her camp attempt to present Jace and Jory as offerings to Ulamog. Turns out they're actually a newly established cult calling themselves the Eternal Pilgrims, utterly devoted to Ulamog. Jace distracts the cultists with illusion magic. Well, that's what he really did. What he thinks they did was set them all on unquenchable fire. Lucky they don't know Jace isn't a pyromancer. Leaving Ulamog's presence, Jory discusses with Jace what they need to do from here. Jace wants Jory to go back and warn the camp they came from that Ulamog is moving in their direction. However, Jory is unwilling to let Jace go to the Eye alone. And yet, sure enough, Jory soon finds herself on the way back to camp. She's just managed to convince Jace that he should go onto the Eye alone, while she goes back to the camp to warn them, right? That's what she said. No, Jory realizes she's been had. Mind mages, man. We rejoin the survivors' camp in the Survivors of Skyrock. Commander General Vorik is in poor health. His wounds are catching up to him, and he's steadily dying from Eldrazi corruption. It seems Vorik will die before he sees through the plan to evacuate this camp and move on towards Zulaport. Meanwhile, Gideon is leading some of the survivors in diverting running water toward their camp, trying to make the camp a bit more permanently livable. Tazri, Vorik's closest advisor, is unamused as Vorik's evacuation plan requires them to be ready to leave the camp behind and soon. She also thinks Gideon might be stalling until Jace returns from the Eye. Another group of refugees approaches the camp pursued by a flying Eldrazi. Gideon, with some help from a Skyrider, manages to take down the monster. However, the refugees were looking for Seagate and are disheartened to find it in ruins. Meanwhile, Gideon comes to a crucial realization. Even if they evacuate this camp and make it to Zulaport, eventually they'll have to evacuate there as well. Zulaport may not even still be standing by the time they get there. Vorik, dying, calls Tazri and Gideon, the latter of whom attempts to convince Vorik of his own realization. They can't afford to keep evacuating, or else there will swiftly be nowhere left to evacuate to. Instead, they should rally at Skyrock and retake Seagate. Tazri remains unmoved, but Vorik is convinced. He passes the title of Commander General onto Gideon with his dying breath. Gideon then delivers a rousing speech to the survivors in the camp, inspiring them to support his cause and prepare to retake Seagate. And that's where we'll leave off for this video. We've got one more in the pipeline to catch up with the rest of the story that we've gotten since the last time, so look out for that. What do you think of the story so far? Remember, this is only part 1, so get hyped for more. As always, subscribe for the latest and most reliable Magic the Gathering information you could ever need. This is the Mana Source. I'm Wedge. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.